Introduction. Aristotle wrote, "I count him braver who overcomes his desires than him who conquers his enemies, for the hardest victory is over self." You might be listening to this book because you're curious why hundreds of thousands of porn users around the globe are experimenting with giving it up. But more likely, you're listening to it because you are engaging with pornographic material in a way that you find troubling. Maybe you have been spending more time online seeking out graphic material than you want to, despite a settled decision to cut back. Maybe you are finding it difficult to climax during sex, or you're plagued by unreliable erections for which your doctor can find no organic cause. Maybe you're noticing that real partners just don't excite you, while online sirens beckon constantly. Maybe you've escalated to fetish material that you find disturbing, or out of alignment with your values, or even with your sexual orientation. If you're anything like the thousands of other people who have realized that they have a problem, it has probably taken you a while to connect your troubles with your porn use. You might have thought you were struggling with some other disorder. Perhaps you thought you had developed unaccustomed depression, or social anxiety, or, as one man feared, premature dementia. Or maybe you believed that you had low testosterone or were simply getting older. You might even have been prescribed drugs from a well-meaning doctor. Perhaps your physician assured you that you were wrong to worry about your use of pornography. There are plenty of authoritative voices out there who will tell you that an interest in graphic imagery is perfectly normal, and that therefore internet porn is harmless. While the first claim is true, the second, as we shall see, is not. Although not all porn users develop problems, some do. At the moment, mainstream culture tends to assume that pornography use cannot cause severe symptoms, and as high-profile criticisms of pornography often come from religious and socially conservative organizations, it's easy for liberally minded people to dismiss them without examination. But for the last 9 years, I have been paying attention to what people say about their experiences with pornography. For even longer, I've been studying what scientists are learning about how our brains work. I am here to tell you that this isn't about liberals and conservatives. It isn't about religious shame or sexual freedom. This is about the nature of our brains and how they respond to cues from a radically changed environment. This is about the effects of chronic overconsumption of sexual novelty delivered on demand in endless supply. This is about youthful access to limitless hardcore streaming videos, a phenomenon which is moving so quickly that researchers have not been able to stay current. For example, a 2008 study reported that 14.4% of boys were exposed to porn prior to age 13. But by the time stats were gathered in 2011, early exposure had jumped to 48.7%. A 2017 cross-sectional study of Australians aged 15 to 29 reports that 69% of males and 23% of females first viewed porn at age 13 or younger. All of the males and 82% of the females had viewed pornography at some point. Similarly, daily porn viewing was rare in the 2008 study, 5.2%, but by 2011, more than 13% of adolescents viewed porn daily or almost daily. In 2017, 39% of males and 4% of females, age 15 to 29, viewed daily, often on their smartphones. Until about a decade ago, I had no opinion about internet porn. I thought that two-dimensional images of women were a poor substitute for actual, three-dimensional women, but I've never been in favor of banning porn. I grew up in a non-religious family in Seattle, the liberal Northwest. Live and let live was my motto. However, when men began showing up in my wife's website forum claiming to be addicted to porn, it became clear that something serious was going on. A longtime anatomy and physiology teacher, I am particularly interested in neuroplasticity, how experiences alter the brain, the appetite mechanisms of the brain, and, by extension, addiction. I'd been keeping up with the biological research in this area, intrigued by discoveries about the physiological underpinnings of our appetites and how they can become dysregulated. The symptoms these men, and later women, described strongly suggested that their use of pornography had retrained and made significant material changes to their brains. Psychiatrist Norman Doidge explains in his bestseller, The Brain That Changes Itself. The men at their computers looking at porn had been seduced into pornographic training sessions that met all the conditions required for plastic change of brain maps. Since neurons that fire together wire together, these men got massive amounts of practice wiring these images into the pleasure centers of the brain, with the rapt attention necessary for plastic change. Each time they felt sexual excitement and had an orgasm when they masturbated, a spritz of dopamine, the reward neurotransmitter, consolidated the connections made in the brain during the sessions. Not only did the reward facilitate the behavior, it provoked none of the embarrassment they felt purchasing Playboy at a store. Here was a behavior with no punishment, only reward. The content of what they found exciting changed as the websites introduced themes and scripts that altered their brains without their awareness. Because plasticity is competitive, the brain maps for new, exciting images increased at the expense of what had previously attracted them. The reason, I believe, they began to find their girlfriends less of a turn-on. As for the patients who became involved in porn, most were able to go cold turkey once they understood the problem and how they were plastically reinforcing it. They found eventually that they were attracted once again to their mates. The men on the forum found such material and the research underlying it both comforting and helpful. At last, they understood how porn had hijacked the primitive appetite mechanisms of their brains. These ancient brain structures urge us toward evolutionarily beneficial behaviors, including an appreciation of novel mates, helping to discourage inbreeding. However, our behavioral choices in turn affect our neurochemical balance in these same brain structures. This is how chronic overconsumption can have unexpected effects. It can make us hyper-aroused by our favorite enticements, such that immediate wants weigh heavier than they should relative to longer-term desires. It can also sour our enjoyment of, and responsiveness to, everyday pleasures. It can drive us to seek more extreme stimulation, or cause withdrawal symptoms so severe that they send even the most strong-minded of us bolting for relief. It can also alter our mood, perception, and priorities, all without our conscious awareness. Armed with an account of how the machine works that drew on the best available science, former porn users realized their brains were plastic, and that there was a good chance they could reverse porn-induced changes. They decided it made no sense to wait for an expert consensus about whether internet porn was potentially harmful or not, when they could eliminate it and track their own results. These pioneers began to take control of their behavior and steer for the results they wanted. They saw the gains from consistency without panicking about setbacks, which they now accepted with greater self-compassion. Along the way, they learned and shared some truly fascinating insights about recovery from internet porn-related problems. Brand new discoveries that made the return to balance less harrowing for those following in their footsteps. That was fortunate because a flood of younger people who had begun using internet porn earlier in their lives while their brains were far more malleable were about to swell the ranks of those seeking relief from porn-related problems. Sadly, many were motivated by severe sexual dysfunctions, delayed ejaculation, anorgasmia, erectile dysfunction, and lack of attraction to real partners. Ominously, as early as 2007, renowned sexology researchers Jansen and Bancroft had stumbled upon evidence that streaming porn viewing apparently caused erectile difficulties, and that high exposure to erotica seemed to have resulted in a lower responsivity to vanilla sex erotica and an increased need for novelty and variation. Unfortunately, they chose not to raise the alarm and investigated no further. In the absence of a warning, persistent porn-induced ED in young men caught the medical profession by surprise. In 2014, doctors finally began to acknowledge it. Harvard urology professor and author of Why Men Fake It, The Totally Unexpected Truth About Men and Sex, Abraham Morgentaler, said, "It's hard to know exactly how many young men are suffering from porn-induced ED, but it's clear that this is a new phenomenon, and it's not rare." Another urologist and author, Harry Fish, writes bluntly that porn is killing sex. In his book, The New Naked, he zeroes in on the decisive element, the internet. It provided ultra-easy access to something that is fine as an occasional treat, but hell for your sexual health on a daily basis. In May 2014, the prestigious medical journal JAMA Psychiatry published research showing that, even in moderate porn users, use, number of years, and current hours per week, correlates with reduced gray matter and decreased sexual responsiveness. The study was subtitled "The Brain on Porn." The researchers cautioned that the heavy porn users' brains might have been pre-shrunken rather than shrunken by porn usage, but favored degree of porn use as the most plausible explanation. Said lead author Simone Kuhn, "That could mean that regular consumption of pornography more or less wears out your reward system." Then, in July 2014, a team of neuroscience experts headed by a psychiatrist at Cambridge University revealed that more than half of the subjects in their study of porn addicts reported that as a result of excessive use of sexually explicit materials, they had experienced diminished libido or erectile function, specifically in physical relationships with women, although not in relationship to the sexually explicit material. Since then, dozens of studies and literature reviews have found evidence of relevant brain changes in internet porn users. However, the pioneers I'm describing didn't have the benefit of any formal confirmation. They worked it all out by exchanging self-reports. I've written what follows to provide a straightforward summary of what we now know about the effects of pornography on some users, how it relates to the findings of neuroscience and evolutionary biology, and how best we can address the problems associated with pornography, both individually and collectively. If you're experiencing internet porn-related problems, give me a few hours of undivided attention, and there's a good chance that I can get you on the road to understanding your condition and dealing with it. Now, how would a guy know if his sluggish sexual performance is related to his porn use or stems instead from performance anxiety, the standard diagnosis for guys without organic below-the-belt problems? First, see a good urologist and rule out any medical abnormality. Next, on one occasion, masturbate to your favorite porn or simply imagine how it was if you've sworn off of it. Then, on another occasion, masturbate with no porn and without fantasizing about porn. Compare the quality of your erections and the time it took to climax, if you can climax. A healthy young man should have no problem attaining a full erection and masturbating to orgasm without porn or porn fantasy. If you have a strong erection to porn but erectile dysfunction without it, then you probably have porn-induced ED. If you can easily masturbate without porn but you have trouble with a real partner, then you probably have anxiety-related ED. If you have difficulty masturbating both with and without porn, you may have progressive porn-induced ED or a below-the-belt problem for which you will need medical help. I begin the book with an account of how internet porn addiction first became an issue, as massive numbers of people with access to high-speed porn began talking about the problems they felt it had caused. I'll include first-hand accounts of how the phenomenon unfolded and the symptoms people commonly reported. The subsequent chapter touches on contemporary neuroscience and the light it sheds on the delicate appetite mechanisms of the brain. I'll summarize some of the recent research on behavioral addiction, sexual conditioning, and why adolescent brains are especially vulnerable in the face of a brain-training superstimulus like today's porn. Chapter 3 recounts various common-sense approaches people have used to get clear of their porn-related problems, as well as some pitfalls to avoid. I don't offer a set protocol. Everyone's circumstances are slightly different, and there are no magic bullets. For example, tactics that work well for single people may have to be adapted by someone in a relationship. And younger guys who developed porn-induced ED sometimes need longer than older guys. Often several different approaches are helpful, concurrently or in sequence. In the conclusion, I'll consider why a consensus about porn's risks is still in the future, and which lines of research are most promising. Finally, I'll consider how society might help porn users to make more informed choices. One final thing before we start. I am not saying that you should have a problem with porn. I am not trying to start some kind of moral panic or to say what is and isn't natural in human sexuality. If you don't feel you have a problem, then I am not about to argue with you. It's up to each of us to decide what we think about graphic sexual content and the industry that produces much of it. But if you do feel that pornography is harming you or someone you know, then listen on, and I will do my best to explain how internet pornography can produce unexpected effects and what you can do about it.